Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete another episode of our Rimworld Extreme Desert Challenge. First of all, apologies for the slight delay since the last episode. The last few days at work were unfortunately a bit busy and, well, quite a bit of time goes into making these videos, but today we are finally back ready to continue our adventures. And speaking of which, in the last episode we received this quest right here, and thanks to a lot of encouragement in the comments of that video, I think today we're going to take it. Constructing a 10 by 25 monument is certainly not going to be a trivial task, but given the fact that we have 16 days to do so, we should not run into too much trouble. In terms of the rewards, we are once again going for the goodwill. If we successfully complete the quest, that will then finally make us allies with the Empire, which unlocks a few interesting perks and options. Now, originally I had planned to put the monument right here, where I have already laid out the plans, but unfortunately we have a decently sized chunk of soft sand in the way, which would restrict construction materials to only wood, and sadly, at least 1/3 of the monument will have to be made out of stone. Now, of course, as always, we have a few options on how to solve this, so I think we will get this monument constructed one way or another, which is why we can start things off today with some granite gathering. After all, for what we have planned, we will need quite a bit of resources. On the next morning then, we can watch Edmo make a few more components, and those will be needed shortly, but not before we have a much more pressing matter to attend to. Yes, a mech cluster has dropped in, luckily still completely dormant, but equipped with a few turrets, a mortar and a mech assembler. So as soon as we activate this cluster, more mechs will be produced at regular intervals, possibly strengthening the forces that we have to go up against. To make matters even worse, the cluster also comes with a mech high shield, and this is used to keep mortar fire out, which would normally be a rather straightforward way to engage the situation. So it looks like we have to get creative here, however not immediately. The mechs are asleep after all and pose no immediate threat to us, so we can keep working for a bit, and who knows, maybe we receive some unexpected help during the next few days. A group of raiders, for example, could already do the trick. Or perhaps we could also utilize the help of a trade caravan, albeit one that seems rather ill-equipped to deal with the issue. But who knows, if they're smart about it, they could at least make life a little easier for us. First of all though, Edmo finishes component number 4, and that means we can finally construct a moisture pump. Now, this machine is normally used to dry out muddy terrain, but it also serves to transform soft sand into regular sand. And we will need that over here anyway, if we eventually want to build our granite exterior wall, and this way we can clear some space for the monument at the same time. Now, while all of that is going on, we are sending out Steak with a bolt-action rifle, because the caravan unfortunately does not want to trade with us, and they are about to make their way off the map. I do believe, though, that we can at least get some use out of them, even though our approach here is certainly of questionable morality. Now, the mechanoids have woken up, and that means it's high time for Steak to retreat. Edmo, Jake and Pollyanna have also already equipped some more combat-ready attire, while the mechs are sending in reinforcements, as they also have a mech drop beacon in their cluster. At the beginning here, it also looks like most of them are about to assault our base, but just a few moments later we can see the first Scyther engaged with our visitors, who themselves are running rather blindly into the heart of the mech cluster, so unfortunately I do not think that they're going to last long. Meanwhile, back at the base we have 2 Scythers of our own approaching. Our defenses are fully manned however, and Jake is well armored to be the bait, so I think we should be fine with this first small wave of attackers. And indeed, here we are, 2 Scythers are down, and so are most, if not all of our visitors. They did manage to kill at least 1 Scyther as well. In the grand scheme of things, however, they definitely served more as a distraction. Jumping back to the base, we now have a lone lancer incoming. It actually seems to be taking aim at Stake in the back, or at one of the turrets to the far right. In any case, though, it misses and is killed shortly after. A few moments later then, we have 2 more lancers coming in, and Pollyanna has also already gone off to sleep. I don't want to risk a mental break with her, and I think we should be able to handle these 2 without her assistance. And indeed, there we are, the last 2 active enemies are now 2 slow-moving pikemen, and that actually gives us enough time for Stake and Edmo to grab a bite to eat, before they then head back to their positions. And as you can see, the first pikeman goes down without any issue whatsoever. Having our enemies trickle in one after another definitely works to our advantage here, and so eventually with pikeman number 2 the story is no different. Now, unfortunately, just in that moment, the mech assembler spawns another pikeman, and it can actually do so 3 more times, but until the next one appears it will take roughly 1 more day. Since the pikeman is slow, Pollyanna has just enough time to finish constructing the moisture pump, and then we have to deal with it focusing on a random piece of wall, which on one hand gives us a good chance to boost Pollyanna's construction skill, but on the other hand also needlessly drags out the inevitable. So eventually we have Stake move in to take a few shots, and that does get the pikeman going. A few moments later then it runs into our kill box, and well, the rest is history. Now at this point we have a little less than 1 day until the next mech spawns, and we also have just about 14 days until the mortar activates. So I would say that the worst is indeed over, but that doesn't save us from more unfortunate news. The veterans among you may have already anticipated this. Yes, relying on the moisture pump to clear the area for the monument here, that is going to be a rather lengthy endeavor. Why is that? Well, the moisture pump does not immediately start clearing the entire area that is marked here. Instead, until that full circle is cleared of soft sand, we will have to wait approximately 1 in-game year. And it is that inefficiency that really decreases the usefulness of the moisture pump. So in order to actually clear this area in a relatively reasonable amount of time, we would have to put down at least a few more of them. And at least at this point in the game, that is really not the most economical thing to do. So instead, I guess we'll just let this one sit here and also construct a fixed power line, because that battery is going to run out before we make any sort of progress. And then we can watch the night set, learn that Donkey Froome is pregnant again, all while we think about how to smartly solve that monument business. Early in the next morning then, a new pikeman has been assembled, but as you can see it is taken down extremely easily, and so I think we should now focus on actually getting rid of that mech cluster for good. And to be honest, I don't actually think we need much for that. A heavily armored Jake with some grenades will do the heavy lifting, while Alistair will clear the way. To evade the enemy turrets, we will actually attack from behind the mountain here. That gives us full cover during our approach, and at the same time already gets us pretty close. With a bit of mining, we can then actually get even closer, and ultimately clear a path that should allow Jake to attack relatively risk-free. Now, at least for the first grenade here, we are putting him in a bit of danger, but fortunately for us, a clear line of sight goes both ways, and so the first turret is quickly destroyed. For number 2, we are then once again relying on grenades not always landing where they're supposed to, and so eventually that one is also taken out. The rest of this is now really quite simple. The last turret does not have any line of sight as long as the mech assembler is standing, and so we can once again sneak up into a position where we have at least a small chance of hitting it, while the turret itself can't do anything. And there we go. All we have to do now is to take out the rest of the mechanoid machinery. Only a few more grenades and this cluster will be history, and with that another threat has been overcome. And there we go. As always, we can salvage some steel, plasteel and components, and then we go back to the base, where another evening sets in. And it is a rather uneventful evening at that. Apart from Pollyanna crafting a cowboy hat for Edmo and Troy making more flake, not a whole lot happens. And so we can skip ahead to the very early morning hours, during which we finally put down the blueprints for that monument. I have decided to simply place it a few tiles higher than originally planned. There is still a tiny bit of soft sand that's going to be in the way, but I think we can circumvent that with wooden walls. And overall, the blueprint here fits quite nicely into the layout of the base that we already have. Once again though, our project is off to a not so great start, as just a few seconds after the first stones have been put into place, we now have a siege to deal with, so it looks like another eventful day lies ahead of us. Now, while we prepare to defend the base, we can also start fighting fire with fire, at least for a little bit. So Redhawk is now manning the mortar and is waiting for the enemies to reach the spot where they want to build their own. Now, ideally, we do not even let it come to that, and the first hit here already does a great job. Sadly, it doesn't kill anyone, but it does blow up half of the enemy's mortar shells, but of course we will keep firing. At the same time though, we might be able to annoy our enemies a bit by sneaking up with Stake here and perhaps taking a few pot shots. It looks though as if he doesn't even get a chance to do that, because for some reason our enemies are now abandoning their plans of laying siege to the steakhouse, and instead they are immediately attacking the base directly. Now, I believe 3 of them are already somewhat injured, but this is still a 15-person raid, so let's get everyone into defensive positions and see how this goes. You may have also noticed that our enemies are actually quite well equipped, not necessarily in terms of their weaponry. We are actually looking at quite a few revolvers, bolt-action rifles and melee weapons, but in terms of protection I am spotting a few shield belts as well as a few suits of armor, and since our enemies are all piling into our kill box at more or less the same time, I think this could be an interesting fight. Now, as you can see, at this point we are pulling our colonists back behind our secondary line of defense, if you will. For the time being, I think we can let the turrets do most of the work. As always, they are much more expandable. You may have also noticed that Jake has suffered a few small injuries, but for the time being it's nothing too severe. I believe most of it are just cracks and bruises. That is also why he continues to be the guy holding down the doorway here. That enemy that fell earlier is unfortunately blocking the door and keeps it from closing, but luckily for the moment it seems like most of our enemies are occupied elsewhere. Thanks to the creative use of doors elsewhere though, we are able to flank some of the enemies hiding in the corridor here, and I have to say that it is high time to cause some casualties, because we are losing turret after turret. Thankfully then, the next enemy to go down here is then already the one that causes our attackers to flee, but in order to do so, most of them decide to go straight through our base, which of course presents us with plenty of opportunities to cause a bit more damage. After all, we do not want to let anyone get away easily. After a few more moments of carnage, Edmo and Pollyanna are now hunting down the last straggler here, and right before the edge of the map they do in fact get the kill, and if I'm not mistaken, that actually means that not a single enemy has managed to escape. Now, as I have mentioned before, some of our enemies have actually been carrying some solid equipment, including primarily shield belts and various pieces of armor. And to salvage those, we are, over the next few hours, going to strip most of our enemies. All the while, Jake receives some quality treatment at the hands of Redhawk, who will shortly move over to the first and only prisoner we were able to capture. After all, there should always be time to practice one's medical skills. With cataracts, a bad back and a drug addiction, this person is by the way not a suitable candidate for the steakhouse. Nonetheless, we will patch him up. I believe that is the least we can do. For the rest of the day then we are stripping corpses and continue construction of the monument. There are actually several full suits of armor among our enemies, and if things get rough and we desperately need some protection, I think we can look past the fact that they are tainted for a while. Ultimately though, we do of course want to make or at least purchase our own armors, but until we have enough for 7 colonists, that could take a while. By the way, most of the weapons that our enemies carried will get smelted down, the rest of their apparel will get destroyed and the corpses will be burned. Still, we are slowly but steadily running into a bit of a storage problem. And while the monument is still being constructed, I don't think that we should start working on a long-term solution in today's episode. Nonetheless, we have constructed a few additional shelves over here that we can use to store some items. For now, we are putting our utility weapons here, so smoke launcher, incendiary launcher, grenades and molotovs, and we even have some room left to store some of the recovered armors. Despite all that, a storage room upgrade seems more or less inevitable at this point. I already have a few ideas for that, but as always I would like to hear yours as well. So let me know in the comments down below how you would create some extra storage space for the steakhouse. I think we should be looking at something at least 2, probably even 3 times the size of what we currently have, and ideally also something that looks a bit more well sorted, if you will, as our current storage solution is pretty much a complete and utter mess. Now, it is around noon and we receive another quest here. However, I am really not so sure about this one. The list of mechanoid machinery that we would have to take out in order to complete this quest is quite substantial. The rewards, meanwhile, are certainly not too bad either, but then again, also nothing that special. Now, we might be able to tackle this with an orbital bombardment, as we still have that as a permit, but I'm not entirely sure if I want to put all of my trust in that. So let me know what you think, and if you perhaps have any ideas on how to solve this, ideally of course without putting our entire colony at risk. Now, once again, the rest of the day remains rather uneventful. We are mostly taking care of cleanup and repair work, and in the afternoon have all of our turrets back up and running. And late in the evening, the steakhouse looks mostly cleaned up already. That is, if you're willing to ignore the bloodbath that is our kill box. On the next morning then, it is once again time for kibble production, and also for another success in the research department, as Troy officially unlocks the secrets of vitals monitors. That means we now finally have all that we need to construct ourselves a proper high-tech hospital, apart of course from the plethora of components needed to make all those beds and monitors. For our next project, we are then staying at least roughly in the realm of medical equipment, because up next we are researching bionics. Bionic replacements are actually improvements over their fleshy counterparts, so we will no doubt find several applications for them, although they do require a good amount of advanced components, so some trading will be necessary in advance. In the afternoon then, it is time to focus on our prisoner again, albeit only briefly, because he has healed to the point where he can walk again, which means we can now release him. And perhaps in anticipation of that, Pollyanna is in an unexpectedly good mood, which results in her receiving a surgery inspiration, so for the next 8 days her surgery success chance is doubled. I'm sure we'll find some use for that. In the meantime, our prisoner walks off and we receive a small faction relation bonus. As you can see, our monument is also coming along nicely, and so another productive day in the steakhouse slowly winds down. On the next morning then, we are constructing another shelf and create at least a bit more storage space that way. The overall problem, however, is of course far from solved. Still, this once again mostly uneventful day also has some good news for us in store, because, as you can see, we are making very good progress on the monument, and to perhaps spare you of yet another plain uneventful workday, let us now jump right ahead to its completion one day later. Yes, it took a while longer than I had anticipated, and actually finding a good spot for it was also a little harder than expected, and yes, that small piece of wooden wall will need to be replaced as soon as possible, but overall, I think we have done good work here. Much more importantly though, we have now improved our relationship with the Empire to the point where we can call them our allies. And let's make use of that new alliance right away, as we are now able to not only request a military aid, but also to request a trade caravan, and looking at our storage situation, I think we could use one. Now this request comes with a 15-point goodwill penalty, but don't worry, we are not going to lose our alliance because of that. Only when the goodwill drops back down to 0 will we return to a neutral relationship, so I think we can afford this. And yes, I know it is absolutely not necessary to do this. A trade ship will likely pass by sooner or later, and we could also always send a caravan of our own, but the completionist in me simply wants to show this off once, so indulge me, I guess. For the remainder of the day then, Randy has no more surprises waiting for us. At night, a rare rainy thunderstorm crosses the extreme desert, and so while the blood of our enemies is washed away and lightning strikes illuminate the steakhouse, I think we have reached a good point to make the cut for today. Once again, I'm sorry that you had to wait so long to see the episode, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless, and if you did, then I would of course be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. If you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can of course do so as well, for example by subscribing, by grabbing some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or by checking out and maybe even pledging to the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.